I don't know. I was laughing to myself just then because I was thinking about today how like laughing and crying are both functions of relief. That's why it's like they're so like related. And sometimes if you like feel like you're laughing or you're crying and you feel like you might want to laugh, like both of which are functions of relief. And normally when I like wake up in the morning and look at Twitter, I think I feel most of both of those simultaneously.
Dwight's the freaking Joker over here. Listen to this guy.
I don't know, man.
I did appreciate just thinking about that. Whoever looped the Buttigieg laugh at the end of the "come on" thing. Did you guys see that?
I haven't, but that sounds chilling.
Because you saw that clip, right, where everybody was comparing to the "please clap" clip.
Oh yeah.
He's like trying to rile people up, and he's like, "Come on," and he has this like weird laugh, and so somebody looped it, and it like legit sounds like the fucking Joker or something. It sounds so eerie and awful.
By having better hands guided by better values on those pulleys and levers of American government. So can I look to you to spread that sense of hope to those that you know? Come on.
Oh, he has the worst laugh since Kamala. I'd say she has the worst one of all of them. Do you guys remember that very, like, stiff, sort of, like, affected kind of at her own joke?
Oh, God.
You know what I'm talking about? During the debate, she would have these very, like, stilted, like, it sounded very rehearsed, sort of, like, one-liners, and then she'd laugh at them.
Yeah.
That's you like appreciate then thinking about that and just thinking about the New York Times interviews with all the candidates, and then having a guy like Bernie come down and just like sit down and talk plainly like a person. Like they want people to just be these weird robots that are just like spitting out these perfect talking points.
I think that's part of the expectation, right? I mean, that was the formal training that everybody involved in, either the kind of like professional journalists or punditry or just like political consultant class, like everybody in that, for their entire lives. I mean, if you're doing well in that industry and you're successful, you're probably in your like 30s to 40s, and so you've had your entire life, all of your training, and again is in relation to people who are coming off in these weird robotic tones or these like incredibly like crafted performance things. And that's why I think like somebody who speaks authentically is so baffling, or not, maybe authentically is not the best word, but just like off the cuff like that, which is one of the reasons why I think everybody in that group was more or less like totally unprepared to handle like Trump when he first started really doing well in like 2015, because people just couldn't conceive of like, because if you look at his rallies even to this day, I mean, his rallies are just like him rambling about like weird stories and like people that he knows, just like weird bugs in his brain that like have caught on. He's like, towels, what's up with towels these days? We don't get towels anymore. We're gonna win, like just like really weird
dishwashers,
shit.
Man. The dishwashers. I watched the dishwasher thing on loop just over and over. He's loving himself so much, man.
I know it's hacked to talk about the toilet thing now, but that was like something about it. It was like I thought I was gonna laugh at it, and it just was like black pill. It was like so depressing. You know what I mean?
What was the toilet thing?
You didn't hear about that? He's complaining about the like what is it, like the force that toilets don't have enough force anymore like they used to. And there's this rapt audience, like you can see them, they're like hanging on his every word.
And we're doing it with a lot of other things, dishwashers, and I won't tell you one of the things because every time I tell you, they do a big number on it. You know the one I'm talking about, right? Sinks, right? Showers, and what goes with a sink and a shower? 10 times, right? 10 times. Well, Bob, not me, of course, not me, but you, him. But I never mentioned that because one time I mentioned all three. I said sinks, showers, and toilets. The headline was Trump with the toilets. That's all they want. They don't even mention it. So I didn't mention that, okay? I go off the record.
I love it. Dude, but that's the same thing. Like the same thing with like the dishwashers when he was like talking to these fucking hogs about like how you have to even get the dishes clean, you need to run the dishwashers 10 times.
Right.
And he was
is that where the 1, 2, 3, 4 is that where the count comes from? I thought he was counting something triumphantly. All
No,
I've seen
dude,
is
he's
people
talking about-
remix that. He's complaining
amount of
about the amount of
times-
times you need to wash dishes.
Well,
That's correct.
I feel like, okay, this is the perfect example of why politics is successful, though. Like, we all laugh at it, but I think it's grievance evacuated of any sort of class context or, like, meaning. So then when you've done that, the only grievance you have left is, like,
Ken.
oh, this damn dishwasher isn't working like I remember it working when I was young. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes. Well, think about like something that I fucking think about all the time is like planned obsolescence and just like, you know, how there's, you know, kitchen utensils that my parents would get as like a wedding gift that we still use,
Right.
let alone, you know, things that you buy now that are just built to fail because
Right.
and we've talked about this on the program before, or maybe I tweeted about it. I don't know. It's all in a fucking fugue state now. But, you know, the corporations and the shipping companies have built their profit margins off of a continued cash flow that allow them to have continuously impressive quarterly reports.
Right.
So like selling you something 30 years ago doesn't help them.
Right,
And
yeah,
I'm sure that that's like the same grievance that people are tapped into. Also, it just clearly shows that like Donald Trump has never operated a dishwasher in his life.
or like changed a diaper, or he's kind of like the archetypal like deadbeat dad, which I think is really funny. You know, like, but I love that it's like this like super rich guy, because I'm sure all those billionaires are deadbeats because they're so psychotically and singularly focused on accumulating more wealth. But I don't, since they run the media that gives us our perception of the world, nobody really thinks of it in those terms. You think of like poor people that way, but it's the opposite, you know.
Oh yeah. Well, that's why the entire like obviously we'll talk about this today, but like the corporate media apparatus is working so hard against, you know, somebody like Bernie, because that means that guys like Ted Turner would have to work.
Right.
Like
I thought
like in a just world, you would have to work.
Right. Shane, you made a really good point, I thought, when you said that they've been around these other android type people their entire lives, so they don't actually know how to seem normal. And like it's sort of this grotesque parade of people trying, like, doing their best impression of a regular human, like every election, you know? And the thing is, they're literally, I know from the because I know staffers, I know, you know, I know some of these politicians, like they literally are on the phone with rich people all day, every day. So I don't think it's an exaggeration or a caricature at all to say that they literally have had a lot of that humanity extracted from them, and this is what you see is what's left.
And then in a weird way, right? Like some fucking maniac shouting about the dishwasher not working is somehow comes across more relatable, right?
Right.
Because
Absolutely.
they're like referring to at least a like an object that is maybe like something that they've encountered in their life before, you know?
Yeah, it's better than someone who has been practicing for their college interview since they were like a zygote. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like,
right.
yeah, I think people are going to pick this kind of zany, crazy uncle thing every time over the T-1000 kind of thing that we have going.
I remember even like the Pod Save America guys saying that, being like, you know, if we're looking at this election cycle, guys, like, you know, you want to have, if you're a politician, you want to be relatable. You want to talk like a human. I can't stress that enough. Ironic that they are not talking like humans as they're telling
I
us.
love that impression because it's like a composite of all the Johns. Like all their voices just...
100%.
Because you weren't trying to do a specific one, I think, right?
That's correct. No, that is an amalgamation of all of them.
I would love to get a media career where it's the expectation for me is to like come on a TV or something, and I get to say like, I think politicians should be relatable in order to get the vote, and they're like, well, thank you for that insight, and I get to walk away with some fucking money and like a press pass, and they're like, oh yeah, if you want, you know, you could come to the mixer afterwards. The coconut shrimp will blow your fucking mind, you know. Like it would just be awesome. It would be so cool to just do that. You have to be relatable. Jesus Christ. Oh my God.
Dude, he was literally the speechwriter for Obama. Like they were consultants. Like that dude was the press secretary or like the communications director for like the National Security Council or something.
Yeah.
I'm like hundreds of thousands of dollars of schooling between the three of them or whatever.
Well, that's a huge advantage I think that Bernie has is that he grew up poor, and like you don't think of it this way because of our perception is all fucked up from everything. But like I think it's actually an advantage to not go through these extraordinary forms of socialization that we call, you know, I'm not against education, but like as an institution, you know, it tends to produce people that speak a certain way and know how to interact with other people in that institution. It's weird because if you talk to people out here, kind of like party people, they see that as a liability and they don't understand that that's like something people like about him. And not just the authenticity, but like that he resembles something like someone you might meet at some point in your life.
Right,
Unlike literally anyone else.
He went to public school.
Yeah.
Right.
Like he fucking went to public school.
I mean, I was talking about this with Carrie the other day, and we were talking about how, like, you know, so much, especially in the kind of like representational models of politics that are put out by, you know, the sort of liberal mainstream and the Democratic Party, and then stuff like the fucking stupid New York Times endorsement, which we can maybe talk about. I don't know, but we were talking about like because there's always this idea, right, that's like couched in a certain model of that, where it's like, oh, you know, what you want to see in a politician is somebody who like looks like you or whatever. And for me, it's like, even by that model, somebody like Bernie looks like me in the sense of like, I grew up in public housing too, you know, like I you know, beyond just like the obvious like New York connection, which I love when he gets grouchy in New Yorker, because that to me is like, those are the people that I was around growing up. But like, you know, more so than that, like you were saying, Ken, you know, like, it's not a liability to not have that weird like affect that's like built into you by all these like elite institutional things that try to govern the way that you speak or the way that you behave, or, you know, in a certain sense. Like, if you're talking about this constant fucking idea of like relatability, like, he is relatable in that he doesn't have that kind of like filter or whatever, right?
Yeah, I agree.
You know a guy like Bernie before you know a guy like fucking Pete Buttigieg, right?
Right, of course.
Well, that's why you see these ridiculous attempts to like use these sort of normal human signifiers, like, oh, go Cubs, or something. Like, they get really performative about, like, do you know what I mean? Like, they get really performative about the ordinary things we would all do and not even think about, because they really have to compensate for the fact that when they start speaking, they go, no, let me be Clark. Matter of fact, you know, all these weird things that ordinary people don't really say, you know?
Or it'll be that shit where it's like, what's your favorite meal? And somebody will be like, I love a good hot dog, you know, like...
Mitt Romney. Hot dog is my favorite meat.
Can we talk about how grotesque it is that we have literally the richest, most elite people, maybe in the history of the world, made to like go and eat like corn dogs in Iowa? That's like that's so funny. It's so grotesque, and nobody seems to even think about it. In a way, we're getting one over on them, because we're kind of like, now you have to level with us, and it's like this humiliating. That's what I love so much about. I love elections in that way. It's the one time that they will debase themselves and to like kind of deign to do what their fucking serfs have to do all the time.
To that point, I cannot stop thinking about this since the 2016 primary. The only candidate that I thought fucking nailed it with the food thing was when John Kasich went to like Arthur Avenue in the Bronx and fucking housed easily 13,000 calories worth of fucking Coca-Cola.
I gotta say, that was pretty relatable. That was awesome. Pretty relatable to just like sit down, ignore the rest of his campaigning events for the day, and just be like, yeah, bring me more pasta. That's good.
I remember kind of like awkwardly, like, everyone's like, oh, this is so funny. He's like a bum. He's like eating. And I'm like, haha, yeah, I wouldn't do that. It's like, dude, I would eat all of that free shit if there's free food.
I love, like, the economy of his response was so good because he was asked about it, and he were like, you know, what the fuck was that? Basically, this what the reporter was saying, and he just said, guys gotta eat.
He was kind of that campaign. He was that cycle's Biden, the sort of meandering.
You mean like the weird stories?
Kind of, yeah, sort of word association kind of stuff.
Oh man, there's got to be some people out there who are still to this day like, I'm a Kasich Republican.
I know one. My best friend's dad is, and get this,
really?
Now he's a Bernie guy, but he just really liked Kasich, and he voted for Kasich last cycle, or in the primary, or I can't remember exactly, but yeah, those are his two people, Bernie and Kasich, and it's just this hilarious reminder of
that
how
does not make sense.
Not ideological and depoliticized people are, and that's maybe not necessarily the worst thing, because it means that the propaganda is not really taking hold. It's more, you know what I mean? Like, if people were just a reflection of how they were indoctrinated to think, they would all be like, let's cut taxes and do structural adjustment, and that's gonna be everything's gonna be great. But people are more than just a receptacle for stuff they hear. They also have kind of aesthetic, preferences.
You know, that's an interesting thing, because I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and like, we were kind of talking about this before we started recording in regards to, like, the 24-hour news network channels, right? And the people who are like hardcore dedicated to that, and tends to be, an older audience. Like, we were talking about respective family members who are just like glued to their fucking TVs all day, especially if you're, in the age of retirement and you're not working and you're just watching like the news all fucking day. usually with some kind of partisan preference. I was talking with like members of my family who will just like watch Fox all day. And like, when you're around that, and if you're, politically sensitive to that material as we are, like, it's really distressing, especially like for me, I'll see like a family member, I'll see a beloved family member, I'll be like, why are you fucking watching this? This is like so bad for you. And then like, but then you think like, how many people are really doing that? And when you look at like Fox's numbers, right, even though it's like the most watched news, it pulls in like a couple million every night out of a fucking, a country of like 300 plus, right?
Yeah.
So how many people are even like kind of cognizant of these things that seem so omnipresent to us, especially if you're, if you're active online and in a political space on like Twitter or whatever? It just seems like every day, everybody's like a part of this discourse, and most people are just like, oh, is there an election? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Like who ate the most pasta?
In a way, so
but I think
it's like double-edged. Like it's depressing because you wish there's like, God damn it, like check in and when we can win or whatever. But then on the other hand, it's also good because that means that they're not really invested in sort of the neoliberal consensus, because the way they consume those shows, if you've ever watched your family, I've had that exact same experience. Like it's almost like you're watching one of your parents like do drugs or something. You're just like, no, don't do that. You're hurting yourself. And do you know what I mean? Like not just Fox, but like just cable news at all. That's how I feel.
Right. Yeah.
The way they consume it, they don't consume it the same way that we might, where we look really closely and we're looking for, it's almost like elevator music. I think a lot of it is sort of playing. And I'm not saying it doesn't have an effect, but it's primarily ambient.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, that's like one of the things I was thinking about for this episode when we're talking about like CNN. It is America's wallpaper.
Oh, that's a really good. Oh, that's good.
Exactly.
Oh, you got my brain.
Okay.
Yeah, they don't have any
man. That's
fans.
really good.
Go on their fucking thing.
A friend of the show came up with that. I did not come up with that. I'm just regurgitating it, but I sold it there for a second.
All right, cut the part where you said somebody else came up with it. No. Actually, cut that whole section. I got an idea. CNN is sort of like America's wallpaper. It kind of goes into the background. It's this ambient noise, and it's an idea, sort of beautiful visual metaphor I just came up with.
Why do you want to watch the news like waiting in a dentist's office? Well, firstly, nobody in America can go to the dentist, so that's a bad.
That's a bad analogy.
Bad analogy. But like, yeah, just like in like a fucking like a country restaurant with like a bar grill or something, and they've got fucking CNN on. Like, why is that important?
Right.
To just have on in the background? Like, when was it that happened? And part of like one of the things that like I think about a lot is like post 9/11, parents and people that you would talk to, whatever, whenever you left them, everybody started saying be safe. And I know, I don't remember, like as a kid, I don't remember people just saying like be safe. And it just became this thing that you say to people and you hear it all the time. And almost like if you were coming from outside of America and you were just plopped into America and you were just touring or something and somebody said be safe, I would be like, dude, is that a fucking threat? Like
it's just where you go to like the Midwest and everybody's being polite to you and you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah, like, do you know that something's gonna happen to me?
It's like you need protection from who? From me.
That's when he like thumbs the gun in his holster. He's like smiling. Be safe, buddy.
It's fucking weird because what also like with the whole like reactionary thing and like Trump supporters or whatever, like we want to make America great again, and then think back to this time where you could be gone for hours and you would drive and you would drop off your bike and run in and have dinner with your parent at your friend's house and you'd never know, their parents didn't know where you were. But the reality is that if you look at the fucking uniform crime report from like the FBI, which is like all the big ones and class 1 crimes like murder, rape, burglary, all that shit, crime has halved since the 90s, let alone since the fucking golden era of white picket fence or whatever, like just weird metaphor people have in their minds. I think just since this post 9/11 thing, and I don't know if you're going to talk about this later, Shane, with like how like the Cold War and communist scare and all that shit. I think like Noam Chomsky was talking about how it was replaced by the war on terror or whatever.
Absolutely,
like this thing of us feeling like we need to say be safe to each other but I think we do feel like that there is some sort of like existential threat, and I think maybe it is because the reality of America is, or any capitalist country, if you do lose your job and you just decided to stop working, you are going to be thrown into the American Thunderdome where there is no protection and there is no safety net, and you will lose your health care. Your family's position on Maslow's hierarchy will decrease. So maybe there is something to that.
They should really say be safe before you go into the doctor's office. That's what they should say. No, but I was thinking to what you were saying, Dwight. I mean, it's very true. Like, I think part of the consequence of, the just something existing, like, this kind of perpetual fucking news machine, or just, the omnipresent ambient background noise, is that, the things that people really register out of it are not like clear-cut, I think, ideological concerns, but perceptions of threat, right? Because those trigger a kind of more lizard brain aspect of you, and they're more recognizable as something like, oh, I really need to pay attention to this. And again, anecdotally, I remember there was one point where I was working, and I had a family member who would text me pretty regularly about, like, whenever there was some kind of either actual, imagined, or inflated idea of, like, a terrorist attack. And specifically, of course, never in reference to, like, active shootings or whatever. It was always in reference to things that could be ascribed to, like, Muslim people, or black or brown people. I would get, like, texts from this family member that was like, oh my God, like, are you okay? And, something would happen in California. I'd be working in New York. I'd be like, yeah, I'm fine. And they'd be like, oh, like, are you watching the news? It's like, no, I'm at work. And they're like, oh my God, be safe, make sure you take care of your wife when you go home tonight. I was like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, what, what are you, why are you transmitting this to me? Like, but it's in that case, I think even if it hasn't been effective at maybe stamping a particular brand of politics on people, one thing that news cycle has been very effective at in America, at least, is like creating this omnipresent sense of danger, both in terms of, again, like vis-a-vis like terrorism, but also, I mean, even just with like domestic crime, right? Like, because, crimes present like news stories, usually very flashy, gory ones, that'll be like very attractive to institution whose whole goal is to get as many eyeballs on it as possible. And so as a result, like, they're going to report those things, especially if it's a slow news day, or quote unquote slow news day. And so it'll just create the sense of, like, I mean, that's the thing, like, I don't know how much it is on the other channels, because again, the only time I ever watch fucking CNN is when I'm at the airport and my phone is dead. But like, at least I could say, again, vis-a-vis like Fox, like the thing that always hits me whenever I'm in, that household and Fox is on all the time, is just like, danger, threat, fuck, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is so scary. Shit. That's the only thing that I can kind of glean off of it. I don't know if the other channels are as pronounced as that.
The stuff that Americans are afraid of, it's like an elephant with the mouse, where they're terrified of this thing. Meanwhile, there's Trump Jr. and these poachers with the gun taking you out, and there's like 10 elephants left, and everyone's terrified of the mouse, and no one has healthcare, no one has retirement, climate change is what it is. You know what I mean? It's like it's insane, the gap between the boogeymen and the actual things that are coming to get you, which exist and are real. And like, there are people that are trying to get it so that you don't get healthcare. But I think those two things are related, frankly. I wonder if people's needs were more attended to, that they wouldn't be as receptive to this kind of, because they want, I think they want to find expression for this anxiety, this inchoate fear that they have, that's justifiable, but they lack the language because no one has any literacy about why their life is like scary. You know what I mean? And then they try to serve up these options instead of talking about capitalism or liberalism or whatever you want to call it. It's like, could I interest you in some Islamophobia? I'd interest you in some, xenophobia. And it's like, it's not the same thing, but at least it'll sort of approximate the feelings that you have.
It'll scratch that itch.
Right.
We're some itchy people here in America. I took the metaphor too far. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No, sir, I'd be no average man. So I had those big dreams.
Welcome back, everybody, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off its death rattle. I'm Dwight, and today we have with us Shane.
Yeah, what's up, Doc?
and joining us, a DC correspondent for The Nation, a guy we are a huge fan of, Mr. Ken Klippenstein.
Hey guys.
Absolutely thrilled to have you on, Ken. It's an honor, honestly, especially for the content of the conversation that we want to have today, which was honestly a little bit spurned from the last Democratic debates, which we did a live stream of to varying degrees of success.
No, we didn't. No, we did not do a live stream.
But just seeing the kind of questions that CNN were giving the different candidates on the stage, and obviously seeing the disparity. It's just a straight up question: why was Tom Steyer even on the stage? Mm-hmm. It's just interesting questions so like that. So we wanted to take a look into CNN and the corporate media more broadly and try to understand why it is the way it is. Why does it tend to favor capital, in our opinion? And just try to kind of put a little bit of a leftist critique on that. Also, it turns out that its creator, Ted Turner, is really weird. So that's a pretty good reason to go into this. So let me just give you guys a little bit of background on Ted Turner. Interesting guy. He's 81 now. He was originally from Ohio, but ultimately grew up in Georgia, in Savannah, going to some hotsy-totsy private schools. Ended up going to Brown University, a sailor he was. One funny thing to note is that Turner's father, when he found out that Ted Turner was interested in majoring in classics, he said his choice made him appalled, even horrified, and that he almost puked.
Very normal response to have.
I'm just
Very
picturing,
cool, Dad.
Community. What is Pierce's dad? That's the one I'm picturing.
Oh yeah.
So things kind of took a little bit of a weird turn. In March of 1963, after Ted Turner had moved back to the South to become the general manager of a branch of his father's business, his father owned a outdoor billboard advertising company, and he owned a couple other smaller things. But he was like a rich guy, a real well-to-do guy. And his father killed himself in March of 1963. So immediately after that happened, he inherited the business and he stepped up as, the CEO of the business. And this was at the age of 24, and he said he wanted to turn the firm into a global enterprise. He joined the Young Republicans, saying he felt at ease among the budding conservatives and was merely following in Ed Turner's far-right footsteps.
Yeah, I mean, the early 1960s, you look around and you're like, oh, the Republicans, I'm going to hitch my wagon to those guys. They're They look like a couple of smart fellas.
So look, there's so much to go into about this. I don't want to waste too much time on that. But ultimately, he had a vision. Ted Turner had a vision to create a 24-hour news channel. So he sold off some assets, and it said that it was going to require an initial investment of $15 to $20 million per month to operate. But he ended up doing it. He specifically wanted to start it in Atlanta because he could have a non-unionized workforce in the newsroom, saving money. Very legal, very cool. He famously stated about it, he said, "We won't be signing off until the world ends. We'll be on, and we will cover the end of the world live, and that will be our last event. We'll play Nearer My God to Thee before we sign off."
It's the 24/7 thing. It just seems so gimmicky to me. Like, having that be your life's work and what you're remembered for. It's like being remembered for those like cameras that you put on the Game Boys. Do you remember the Game Boy?
Oh my God.
Or like fidget spinners or something, like just some kind of throwaway. It just seems so dumb. I can't believe that someone would dedicate themselves.
Well, it was considered, as far as I know, it was considered really gimmicky throughout its early infancy through the first couple of years. And the thing that really turned it around was like the Fall of the Wall stuff, Tiananmen Square, and then the Gulf War, because those were like three like big events where it was like, we're the only news channel that's like showing this stuff all day long. And because sort of like we were talking about earlier on in the intro, like spectacular events like that, like usually you'd only get a clip, a snippet of that if you were watching like a television broadcast news. I mean, obviously this is way before like the internet and people could just like look at whatever they wanted to whenever. So the only place you could like be constantly watching that kind of material as it was unfolding, or even just like replays of the same clips over and over and over again, was fucking CNN.
I feel like a lot of its success, nobody actually, as we were saying before, no one likes this channel. Nobody's a fan. Like, if you go on, if I ever get depressed, I just go on and thinking about like the total hegemony and how much, the sort of neoliberal consensus has dominated our sort of media institutions. I just go online and check out any look at like Anderson Cooper's Twitter and see how many tweets his last tweet got. And then I realize nobody gives a shit about any of this. you know.
Wow.
Like, I feel like a lot of this stuff is just sort of caulk, like CAULK, to like. I was trying to say it with the L, and then I realized, oh, you can't actually. There's no. It doesn't have a sound.
Yep. Not that kind of podcast. I almost said podcock. God damn it.
At least you get a gap this
sometimes
episode.
A cigar is just a cigar, man. Chill out. It's like, I feel like those 24-hour, like CNN, it's like caulk in the sense of like when I get home, if no one's home, I'll just turn the TV on to have some kind of thing to feel like there's something going on, and it's because otherwise it feels sort of. I wonder if it's part and parcel of this like extraordinarily atomized society that we have, that this kind of thing becomes a force in people's day-to-day lives. Because as I said, I don't think anybody's really paying close attention to it. I think it's just supposed to be filler.
I think also, I mean, it might be instructive because, you know, as we've talked a little bit based on some of the, you know, the feedback we've gotten, you know, we do have like a sizable like Zoomer audience. It might be instructive to kind of explain like why this was even gimmicky. Like there used to be a long time ago, there used to be this thing in your house called a television, and the television would have like 4 channels on it, and on those channels, like, you know, for about an hour maybe in the morning and then an hour in the evening, you would have like a news broadcast, and it would be a guy sitting at a desk with a stack of papers. He would read through, and occasionally they would have a guest on. So the whole idea of having like access to like what's going on in quotation marks, like as a constant flow, you know, that in and of itself was novel. Of course, now it's not, by the sheer fact that like obviously a lot of other companies came up, like Fox, to, you know, compete with them, as well as a host of other, you know, existing companies developed into that kind of model of like 24-hour programming, right? And then the whole amount of channels and stuff exploded. But especially now with the internet, it seems so like irrelevant, just because, again, as we were talking about, like vis-a-vis social media, you can like directly connect with like journalists, or, you know, even just like fucking live streams of things happening wherever you want. If you want to connect with news, or even just if you want to connect with like media and stuff, there's a whole host of options. But at the time, there really wasn't. And so I think that's again why, although at first it seemed gimmicky, it did become, you know, at these moments of like sort of geopolitical crisis where there wasn't a lot of other people on the ground, it became this like thing to watch. You know, it was like, oh, this interesting, like I can watch history take place.
Yeah,
you know,
I really agree. It creates this verisimilitude. I don't know a less pretentious word to describe it, but it creates a verisimilitude of like you're being a part of whatever the thing is that's going on. Like you're like, oh, I'm seeing it happen in real time, and you're not really seeing it because you're seeing a filtered and sort of processed, you know, version of whatever it is you're interested in, but you do get the sense that you're there or something, and you're seeing everything as it's happening, and so you're not missing anything. And it's obviously like you don't learn anything from any of these programs. I mean, try watching it. It's not that I dislike it. I literally learn nothing. They don't tell you anything. It's just sort of commentary.
Yeah, no,
but
exactly.
But I think it's supposed to give you the impression that it's like you're plugged in now, and you're seeing this all happen as it happens. You know.
I mean, I think that I mean, even just what you just said there about commentary, that was another thing that like, and CNN wasn't the only, you know, or wasn't even necessarily the first to introduce this idea, but that also was kind of novel when it started, and CNN obviously captured that when it transitioned, or when it, you know, emerged as this like 24-hour network thing, where like, you know, there is no real substantial information that's happening 24 hours a day that's of relevance. And even if there was, there is just like, there is no way to produce that much content in a like nuanced or interesting way, right? Like, or to provide like any amount of insight. I mean, if you look at like real like investigative journalism, you know, a lot of those pieces take like a long time to produce, like even the ones that are like video style, right? They'll put in you know, months and months and months of efforts. They're like making documentary films or something. But in order to do stuff like live like that, what you need to do, right, is rotate in a series of so-called experts, right, who then can come on and like comment on it and give their opinion on it. And then that becomes the sort of opinion side or the punditry class of news, where it's like, you know, if we have one story today, we have, there's the Democratic debate or whatever, right, which in and of itself is, oh, it's a big story. That's like 3 hours of content we can fill right there. And of course, the whole point of filling content is to like sell slots to advertisers. Like that's how they make their money. So it's like, how do we fill in the gaps before that? How do we get people to watch before that? How do we keep them watching afterwards? It's like, well, we'll have panels of experts come on. We have a rotating panel. We have a round table of 12 people who all, you know, can all talk about this. And so any of the real information gets lost in this fucking morass of just like opinions and speculations and like, who knows?
Another part of the economic incentive is, I know when I was working at the Young Turks and they have a lot of video content, if you just post some video that a corporation produced, just on its own, then you can't do that. You have to buy the rights to it. However, if you add some commentary and do what's called, I'm sure Shane knows more about this than I do, make it transformative and produce a new, what in the courts and in the legal system is deemed a new product because you've added some sort of analysis or something like that, then suddenly, boom, it's fair use. So I wonder how much of the pundit world, we're sort of looking at it the wrong way if you say nobody likes them, why do they have them? It might just literally be there to create fair use content. And their popularity is completely irrelevant and not germane at all to why they exist.
Can you explain fair use content?
So the idea is, if say say BBC records some debate in the UK or something, and you want to use it. I mean, that's not a great example because BBC is sort of publicly owned, but you can't just throw up their video without paying them to subscribe to whatever their thing is, or what. However, you can use that video, and then if you comment on it in such a way, and the courts through case law and things have established these different criteria to determine what makes analysis transformative, because it's not quite as easy as just saying oh, I like this video, check it out. It's not quite that simple, but you'd be surprised how easy it is to take essentially proprietary content, put the laziest of comment or spin on it, and then just say, oh, I've transformed it and now it belongs to me.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call them lazy. I mean, you look at a guy like Chris Cillizza, and he's obviously putting in a lot of work into what he produces.
That may literally be true. I feel like if he worked any harder, his brain would just be, it's like a car operating at all cylinders. It's gonna just break down.
At peak capacity, everything that he puts out. I don't want to get into talking about Chris Cillizza, but I will. What I find about him, and I know nothing about his background, I have no idea, I don't know this guy, but he seems to me just like the happiest guy in the world.
Yeah.
Just kind of he's just like a useful idiot. He's just like, oh, well, I don't know. I guess I'll, see how this debate goes and make a prediction on that. Send it out there. Thanks, CNN.
If I made that kind of money for that kind of work, I would also be the happiest guy in the world, dude. All right?
Fuck, man. It's incredible.
He's almost kind of winning because I don't think he perceives what we're laughing at about him at all. I think he's total bliss. I've heard other people in media say that, who's the guy we used to laugh at? Ron Fournier, that he has he wrote a book about his son. He seems to have a good relationship with him. It's almost like it can be this sort of grace if you're not quite astute enough to perceive how absurd the institution that you're in is, at least on an individual level.
I would in our view of how we would organize our political economy, I would like for all of us to be afforded to have the mood of Chris Cillizza.
Just I call it golden retriever brain.
So true, dude. So true.
Sometimes I want to make, and I can't even bring myself to do it because it's like you're spraying the cat with the bottle. You feel bad about it, it's just this innocent little thing.
So I want to get into what happened. We want to talk about kind of corporate media structure and specifically why we use that term corporate media. And I just want to close out this last thing about Ted Turner. I can't not tell you. There's a lot of weird controversies about him. He's one of those guys that will internalize all the worst things about authoritarianism, where he'll get some things right. He was climate change is a really bad thing. Okay, good. But then he said, we should adopt a one-child policy like China in order to combat it. Not quite. But the one thing that is by far my favorite, which was an incident that happened in February of 1999, when he was being asked about the Pope. This was live in front of a thing, some sort of panel. This was televised. He was asked about the Pope. This was then 1999. It was Pope John Paul II, who was Polish. So he was just asked a question about the Pope, and a member of the audience asked him if he had ever met the Pope, and he just said, "Ever seen a Polish mine detector?" And then just pointed at his foot.
Oh my God,
man!
That's some old-timey racism. This guy is like Pierce's dad in Community.
This is real. He had to officially apologize to not only to the Pope but also to the Prime Minister of Poland.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he's such a weird fucking dude. I mean, I mentioned I wanted to talk about this, but the colorization of movies thing is kind of amazing. amazing.
Please.
So, I mean, Dwight, you'll probably have a little bit more information when we, again, get into the specific corporate structure. But, part of, his empire, like all these kind of big media companies and corporations, was to constantly accumulate more and more and acquire more and more and more and consolidate that. So, like, CNN, although it was like sort of his flagship project, the companies that he controlled a much wider range of that, right? And so there's a ton of channels that are still in existence today for anybody who still has a television with like cable news or just a cable subscription period. Like Turner Classic Movies, TNT, all these were like, are part of his network. And so in the 80s, when he was starting to do that, when he was acquiring, again, like sort of these television channels, and then ultimately through the acquisition of like Warner Brothers, acquiring like their backlog of like all of the old classic movies that they had, and he got the rights to both like show them on television, but also to for like VHS was very big then, to create home video copies of these films that hitherto you couldn't really see unless they were like playing in an old movie theater or something. He got this like weird obsessive idea that like you should just colorize old black and white films, and it's not just like random films or whatever. These are like the films that are, if you're like a film person, or like the canonical classic, like emblems of this art form, shit like Casablanca or Citizen Kane. God. Like these were the films he was like, we should colorize them. They'll look better in color. And they were eventually, they're like, I think like Congress even stepped in. I know George Lucas, of all people, went to Congress to like give testimony, to Congress to be like, because a lot of these films had been classified under the Library of Congress as like important cultural artifacts of of America, and so like Lucas was like, you can't tamper with old films, because they're enshrined. These are like films that are really important. Of course, that became very ironic later on with the special editions. I'm not going to talk about that. But interestingly, the whole idea of colorizing films was satirized in Gremlins 2.
What? Oh my God.
Yeah, it was satirized in Gremlins 2.
That's right.
Who was an amalgamation of Ted Turner and Donald Trump, and his name is Daniel Clamp, and he runs Clamp Tower, and the Gremlins go haywire in that.
Wow.
I love the notion of colorizing Casablanca. That's like...
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
It's like, Sistine Chapel. You know what would look nice? If we had, like, neon lights on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Could make it, like, glow in the dark.
It's so tacky, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the other thing about it, is it's so like, weird to do, but he was super insistent on it. I was trying to find one of the quotes he had about it, because he kept defending it every time, because everybody was against doing this. Like, nobody wanted him to colorize the movies, and I think his position, I can't find the quote from here verbatim, but his position was like, I own the goddamn rights, I can colorize the goddamn movies. It was just like you said, Dwight, this like weird authoritarianism for like no real purpose except some personal taste thing.
If I'm thinking about it, and we'll talk about this more when we're kind of like bringing this up together and we're wrapping it up and shit, but like the whole point, and I'll talk about this in a second when we talk about the corporate structure of all these things, and it's just a fucking psychotic leviathan to even try to understand all these different like subsidiaries and joint ventures and whatnot. But like my take on that, probably economically, is like all of Turner's companies have been run by these weird like consultants and MBAs and shit that come in and see how can we extract value for our shareholders. And I would just imagine for something like that, it was probably like, okay, this is an undervalued. I'm just gonna do the Pod Save America guys, which are also the same voice that I do for like the MBA douches. But like, so there's actually some undervalued assets here that if we could put in a little bit of value, we could actually create a lot of value for our shareholders. So I think what we're actually going to do is have these colorized by a small team of contracted employees, and we're actually going to be looking at a 70 to 72% return over a period of 5 years. Clearly, I have not met anybody like that. Sorry, Shane, was there something else you wanted to close up with that, or should I go?
Oh, no, I mean, the only last thing I was going to say about the colorization of movies is that, like, especially given the time frame that we were talking about, which was, the 1980s, where you weren't really, you were talking about probably an analog process and not a digital one. I'm sure they would look like shit, too, if you tried to colorize them. They would just look like fucking dog shit. Like, yeah, it's like this weird, tacky kind of, approach, which is, again, one of the reasons why I brought up Gremlins 2 is that it is relevant to discuss Turner and Trump in the same sentence, which we don't have to do necessarily more, but if you want an idea of what that kind of 80s slick CEO capitalist guy looks like, check out Gremlins 2. Owned by Warner Brothers, by the way.
Does Trump seem like a very anachronistic figure? Like, I would have thought that we had exorcised those particular demons in, like, the 80s and 90s. Like, and then it came roaring back. Do you know what I mean? Like, doesn't he feel so...
You're right, obviously. Like, you're obviously right, but, like, why? I don't know, isn't it kind of the same thing? Like why is Vaporwave cool? You know what I'm saying? Like, why do we like the, like these shout out to the Zoomers, but, like, Zoomers are interested in, like, you know, being in a mall in, like, fucking Reebok pump-up sneakers in, like, 1993. Like, they never lived that, but, like, they understand that aesthetic and they understand that it is cool for some reason. I don't know why it, like, has its own currency.
It's not cool. I'm sorry.
Well, personally, I find there to be a little bit of charm in it.
Okay,
but, like,
right.
not
the lines are drawn.
So much.
The lines are drawn.
Not so, like, I think it's, like, interesting. Like, I'm clearly not a sports fan, but, like, Miami Heat changed their aesthetic to be the kind of, like, vaporwave aesthetic and shit. I don't know, man.
Speaking of sports, because I know nothing about them, Turner owns the Braves.
Yeah,
and I'm assuming that's a team, and not a squad.
I'm assuming
commandos.
that's another. I'm assuming that's yeah, exactly, another fucking completely insensitive cultural trope that should just be put into the dustbin of history.
Oh yeah, I mean the other thing, we don't have to get too much into it. The other reason why I thought there was, like, some kind of comparison to do between Turner and Trump is, like, Turner has always also been, like, a fucking, you know, weird asshole in the press and throwing his money around. His nickname for a long time was Mouth of the South, which was a sort of
Yikes.
polite way of saying that he was just kind of racist and awful. And, like, yeah, like with the Braves thing, there's, like, a picture of him that we could potentially use as the episode art, but probably not. But, like, of him, you know, wearing the full, like, you know, sort of very, you know, kitschy, like, you know, colonialist Indian headdress thing, and he's at the game hanging out. Yeah, I mean, he's one of those guys. I mean, it shouldn't surprise anyone, but it's like he does that. He at least embodied that same thing that a lot of people are, like, find, you know, abhorrent about Trump, where he comes from that kind of older class of, like, big business guys where, like, you know, they're sort of crass in this very elitist way, but it's somehow to a certain crowd rubs off as authentic because he's reflecting, like, you know, genuine racist attitudes or just I mean, it's the same thing with, like, the Polish joke, right? Where it's just like, why would you say that at that moment? Like, it's not like even at that moment in the conversation they're like, why don't we exchange some funny anecdotes about Polish people? It's like somebody's bringing up the Pope, and in your mind, you know, in his mind, he's like, oh, the Pope's Polish. Oh yeah, they're a group of people I can make fun of pretty easily and casually. You know, it's just like a total disconnect. A real foot in the mouth type guy.
So to go to introduce, like, just talking about the corporate structure of this, it's so indecipherable, I think purposely, that, like, I don't want to get into it that much, but long story short, in October of 2016, it was reported that AT&T was in talks to acquire Time Warner. It would have given AT&T obviously significant holdings in the media industry, which is weird. I mean, so AT&T had a competitor, Comcast, who had acquired NBC Universal. And I think, before that, like, General Electric owned NBC. And Shane, you brought this up in, like, a way early episode where we were talking about how monopolistically back then in, like, the early 1900s, you would just buy up all of your direct competitors
Yeah.
In order to just create, like, I think you used the example of, like, you would just become American Oil or something like that.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
everything, you know, you would just own all of it. And then antitrust came through. So now you have these completely diversified mega structures of corporations. Like, AT&T is a producer of internet and phones. What the fuck? Why do they want Casablanca?
Right.
You know, it doesn't make sense. Now, initially, in 2017, the FCC chairman, Ajit Pai, refused to review the deal. I think, and Ken, you're smiling. I'm just, like, super curious what you're thinking about.
I just can't stop thinking of that fucking Harlem Shake video he did, like, 7 years after it was a thing.
Yeah.
No.
Do you remember? He's like,
yeah.
Oh, he's offering people condolences for the fact that they're gonna axe murder fucking the internet as we know it when they got rid of net neutrality. And he's like, but don't worry, guys. It was the most humiliating. He's like, don't worry, guys. You'll still be able to Harlem Shake. And then it's like this meme from like 7 years. Oh my god.
Oh.
You want to talk about anachronistic?
So eventually, you know, a few, let's say 18 months after the deal was initially initially talked about, a district judge ruled in favor of AT&T, allowing this acquisition to go ahead without any conditions or remedies. And what he had argued was that the Department of Justice provided insufficient evidence that the proposed transaction would result in lessened competition. It's a fucking joke, man. Like, it's a fucking joke. But then he continued. He said he warned that the government attempting to obtain an appeal or stay on the ruling would be manifest unjust, as it would cause certain irreparable harm to the defendants. You know, you want to be sensitive around AT&T. They're a bit shy. Fucking incredible. So it caused this like big shakeup with the CEOs. John Stanky. Do the stanky leg. He took over as CEO. He was in charge of the AT&T and Time Warner integration team. And Time Warner Incorporated became Warner Media LLC. And that's what we have today. That is what operates CNN. Jeff Zucker is the CEO of Warner Media. And I think he's even stepped up to he's now also the COO of AT&T itself, which is fucking incredible to me, because like, you know, we talk about like how weird it is that these people are unbelievably rich. And of course, like the main drum that's beaten is like that this is a meritocracy and that they got there because they worked very hard. But like, I'm sorry, there's not enough fucking hours in the day to be the CEO of Warner Media and the COO of AT&T at the same time. It's just a fucking joke. You're just in the club. It's just Succession.
Well, you don't have enough productivity apps, do you?
Yeah,
you get a couple of those babies in there.
Also, I don't know, you know, if you've ever heard of this little thing called cocaine, which if you do enough of it, it gives you energy throughout the entire day.
I think I remember, what's his name? Who's the Microsoft psycho?
Bill Gates?
No. The uppity one that's like real fucking, he's like all intense. Developers. The fuck is that guy's name?
Mickey Mouse? What the fuck?
No,
I'm just I'm thinking of Jordan Peterson, like the tech bro.
Steve Ballmer.
Okay.
Fucking hell. Steve, he was like he like the CEO or fucking whatever of Microsoft. He was like, and he was asked like, how do you do it? How do you maintain all this energy? And he just goes, iced tea.
How do you get up for that kind of a performance? Is it like 65 cups of coffee? What do you do before you hit the stage? Because that's the energy you gave at Microsoft. That's the energy you give at the Clippers. How do you do that?
Iced tea.
Iced tea.
Iced tea.
Okay, the drink, you don't listen to his music. It's just like you got it.
You
All right.
got me.
It's very.
They're such freaks. They're all such freaks, dude. Who's one billionaire that is anywhere approaching? I'm not gonna say normal, but like someone that you would ever even meet.
None. That's what I think like is one of the like the cool parts of Succession is that like when you watch it and you like get all into the the intricacies of what's going on with the drama in the family, but I like how they then like intersperse relatively normal people and you just realize the contrast of how fucked up they are. Like they're not normal fucking individuals.
Right. Yeah. Well, dude, who would just the concept of like accruing $1 billion? Like what normal person would accrue $1 billion of anything? Like any other thing? Yeah. If it wasn't dollars, you'd be like, that guy's insane. But then if it's money, it's like, oh okay, that's what he's doing. Like, how we normalize it. You know what I mean? Like if you had if you're collecting like just like $1 billion of anything, it's fucking bizarre.
You can't even spend it. That's the thing.
Exactly.
Like you can't even fucking spend it unless it's you just turn it over to fucking Vanguard asset management or something. But like if you wanted to just as a human that like I was thrilled to go to Toys R Us as a kid to buy a thing. Like that was fucking a huge deal. So if you wanted to just be a general consumer, like you couldn't fucking spend $1 billion.
I don't know. I could spend it.
Well,
I'm not saying responsibly, but I definitely I would get $1 billion and the next week I'd be like, all right, we really got to launch that Patreon.
We gotta start talking budget.
I mean, like personally, I would go purchase the Hunt's Corporation, the ketchup manufacturer. I would give all the workers just lifetime salaries and shutter it. Just shutter Hunt's.
I mean, I did have one thought. Dwight, you had mentioned earlier, like, why would AT&T even try to acquire Time Warner, right? Like, what would be the motivation? And the answer is, right, and I mean, we don't have to get too much into it right now because I don't want to detract if you had, other stuff to talk about regarding the merger, but like, because of like what like the market incentives are, particularly after the repeal of net neutrality. For a while, and I'll get into this more detail later, like the thing that is really was significant about, Warner Brothers, Time Warner, and like its other kind of competitors like Viacom and News Corp, NBC Universal and stuff was that like, they were a part of this like elite club of the biggest media conglomerates, right? I think like in the mid 1980s, it was something like 90% of American media was dispersed across 50 companies. And then by the early 2010s, those 50 companies have become 5 or 6 companies. Like 90% of media was controlled by them. And the operative term there is not monopoly, but oligopoly, sort of like oligarchy. So instead of it being like one company that controls an entire industry, it's a small amount of companies that control the entire industry, but they can functionally still run it on a cartel or monopoly basis because they can all set the same rules, set the same, standards and practices, price fixing and all that kind of stuff. And so to get back to why AT&T would want to even acquire Time Warner, what started to happen is right as that those big consolidations were happening in the 2000s into the early 2010s, was also the explosion of the internet, right? And so now those big media companies are no longer the top big ones. And when you look it up, the largest media company in the world is Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google. And if you go down the list, I think Facebook is like 3rd or 4th in term, this is like their valuation, right? And so these old, traditional broadcast models of media production are now in like direct competition with internet shit. And so the way that they all see and they're all, like fucking hemorrhaging money because of that, because, all of this, at the end of the day, the money comes from advertisers, and most of the advertising money has moved to these new platforms and spaces on the internet. So, to come back around, internet companies and these traditional media companies, right? At one point, there was like, in the 2000s, they were considered like, these are the disruptors, right? They're like challenging the media apparatus, and these are the ones that are going to take down these big conglomerates. But now they're realizing it's actually a lot better to just work cooperatively, especially with the popularization of stuff like streaming. So AT&T doesn't necessarily produce its own media, so you'd be like, why would it buy this like giant media production apparatus? But it does own a bunch of the infrastructure of the cabling over which, this media is inevitably going to get streamed.
Fuck.
And so that was one of the things that that has been stripped out of net neutrality really over the last like several decades. But there's this thing called common carriage laws. I don't know if I should get too much into this, but the whole concept of common carriage laws is like, the idea that if you provide like an infrastructural service, if you provide a road, right, you should be fair and neutral in your application to like who can use the road, right? Or if you're like a mail service, right, if you deliver mail, you can't discriminate against certain types of mail. You have to take all kinds of mail and deliver it, right? That's like the premise of common carriage laws. Now, if you strip that out of like the technological apparatus of like internet service providers, right, which is what has happened, what that means is like now effectively they can. So if AT&T, or whatever their fucking, Comcast, what AT&T owns Spectrum, what do they own? I should have looked this up before I started rambling. But I'll just say, whatever internet service provider AT&T owns, right? Like, so if you get, if you have that coming into your house, right, and that's the service provider that connects to your, router or whatever, they're going to have an incentive, right, when they start acquiring like media production companies to be like, well, we're going to want you to get the Warner Brothers stuff, or in this, or in the case of, again, among the many things that Warner Media owns, including stuff like HBO, right? Like they might be like, well, HBO Go or HBO Now, that's going to come really fast on your service. But if you try to operate something like Netflix, maybe less fast until we work out a deal with Netflix, or alternatively until we just buy Netflix outright. Then they'll work fine, right? So that's like the point of these mergers that, again, at first glance, you would wonder like, why the fuck does a phone company want to own like, the DC extended universe? And the reality is nobody wants to own that because it's a piece of shit. But
Shane, you just asked like what Spectrum, who owns Spectrum, and I looked it up and I can't even fucking figure it out. Like it's now, I went to the Spectrum Communications page and it brought me to the Charter Communications page. And then it said it was for part of like Time Warner. So I don't even fucking know. Doesn't matter. Here's the interesting thing. Once AT&T acquired Warner Media, AT&T hired a company called Elliott Management. Now, they're a hedge fund, but what they do is investment management. So if you purchase a thing like AT&T did, they will come in. They're known as Vulture Capital, and basically they will come in and fucking strip it. They will just tear it apart in order to do this. So I'm going to read from a quick CNN article here. It said AT&T's truce with Elliott Management avoided a protracted fight with one of the world's most successful activist shareholders, sent the company's stock to a 52-week high on Monday. The plan, as described by Elliott Management, includes significantly enhanced operational efficiency with meaningful margin expansion and a full review of the portfolio, whatever the fuck that means. But the CEO of AT&T said, I think our interests are 100% aligned. Seriously. Fucking great. But what was interesting was there was a tweet about this move of Elliott Management by none other than the President of the United States, Mr. Donald Trump. Like an hour after it was announced, because, obviously Trump talked a lot about CNN, during the primaries, during the general election, and then during the first part of his presidency. I will always watch him sparring with Jim Acosta for like 7 minutes straight. It is endlessly hilarious. But he tweeted, this was in September, an hour after it was announced that Elliott Management was going to be doing work with AT&T's acquisition, said, great news. I'm not going to do it. Great news that an activist investor is now involved with AT&T. As the owner of very low rating CNN, perhaps they will put a stop to all the fake news emanating from its non-credible anchors, in quotation marks. Also, I hear that because of its bad ratings, it is losing a fortune, but most importantly, CNN is bad for the USA. Their international division spews bad information and fake news all over the globe. This is why foreign leaders are always asking me, why does the media hate the U.S. so much? It is a fraudulent shame, and it all comes from the top.
So did the fake news end after that?
That was it.
You've got to update the listeners.
That was it.
We do an addendum like a few months later, like after careful examination, we've noticed that fake news precipitously dropped.
What was funny is that earlier, when the merger was still happening, Donald Trump tweeted, this was in June of 2019, I believe that if people stopped, okay, editorial note, he did write stoped. He forgot to pee. But anyway, I believe that if people stopped using or subscribing to AT&T, they would be forced to make big changes at CNN, which is dying in the ratings anyway. It is so unfair with such bad fake news! Exclamation point. Why wouldn't they act? When the world watches CNN, it gets a false picture of USA. Sad. So, but the point is that he understands this thing, right? He understands vulture capital. He's a billionaire, so he gets why this would happen. Like he's very intimately attuned to it. There's only like two reasons that I could think of that like he would respond so quickly to something like this. Is one, it's that he hates CNN and whatever, and that's, he wants to know what's going to happen to them, and he views them as an enemy, I guess. Or two, that's part of his class interests, right? Because he recognizes as a billionaire investor himself that like, this is something that is important to me, and I'm glad to see this happening. So this is the last thing that I just want to say about CNN, and then Shane, we can discuss this. There was a interaction between a friend of the show, Brian Stelter, and Faz Shakir, who's the Bernie Sanders campaign manager. And this was in July of 2019. And it's a few minutes long, but I think it's important enough to play in full. And I think it's one of the deftest indictments of the interaction between corporate media and working class interests. And Brian Stelter fucking wets his pants during it, and it is absolutely hilarious to listen to.
Joining me now is the campaign manager for Sanders 2020, Faz Shakir. Great to see you. You're in Detroit. You're getting ready for the debate. We're 2 days away. Do you have expectations for this debate versus NBC's debates? Were there problems with NBC other than those technical glitches, for example?
Brian, I'm going to make a radical comment. This isn't a criticism of CNN. It's really a criticism of the media environment. But I believe these debates tend to make the American people stupider. They're performative theater, and we don't end up having the conversations that affect people's lives. So I don't have super high expectations. I think we're going to try to go through it and answer the questions, respond to Donald Trump's tweets and all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, this isn't, I think, how you win a campaign.
How do you win a campaign then? Because y'all have been complaining a lot about the media coverage. Don't you need journalists to be out there on the trail with Sanders covering the campaign?
Brian, you know this well, that Bernie Sanders talks to journalists all the time. He talks to Rachel Maddow, talks to George Stephanopoulos, was meeting with a number of media outlets even this week on Jimmy Kimmel and others, getting the message out. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we know and we understand we're a campaign that's built out of taking on power, taking on established power, arguing against the corruption of the political system, the economic system, and in many cases, the media system. And so in order to get that particular message out, you got to go directly to voters. And that's why you hear us trying to build these media channels, talking directly to people.
What is the heart of the critique about what Sanders calls the corporate media? What do you want people like me to do differently?
Well, Brian, this isn't a personal commentary on you or any other journalist. There's many wonderful, talented journalists out there. But in about, a minute or so or 2 minutes or so, you're going to cut to commercial breaks and you're going to see some pharmaceutical ads. You're going to see a lot of ads that are basically paying your bills and the bills of this the entire media enterprise. And what that ends up doing is incentivizing you and others to make sure that you're asking the questions and driving the conversations in certain areas and not in certain areas. Right now,
I haven't actually seen that, but Brian Stelter has that, what is that guy's name? Chuck Todd energy, where he's just like designed to get owned by everyone.
Oh, yeah.
And everything. What was that guy? You remember the guy they put next to Hannity?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Jesus.
He was just like a punching bag.
Actually, Brian Stelter, when the shit went down with Steve King and let's just say at Mueller Dad 69, Brian Stelter picked it up and he retweeted it or he made a comment about it.
That's the mark of somebody who truly deserves to have the privileged position of an ability to talk to millions of people. Somebody who can parse information like that is
pretty top tier stuff.
It's almost like they value obedience more than competence. makes it
again, which is why Kristalitsa as a golden retriever would be useful. Right. So Shane, do you have any kind of like thoughts about this and just media in general and how this is how CNN and the corporate media and the corporal structure of a for-profit media conglomerate fits into our present predicament?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people, presumably if you're listening to the show again as a smart, discerning consumer of media, you've probably come to the conclusion of, this very astute reading of what is good to listen to by, wading through a lot of the, the bad shit. And I think the term corporate media gets thrown around a lot. And, here it might be valuable to just quickly go over the sort of propaganda model and theory that Herman and Chomsky came up with in the 80s, which is manufacturing consent. At least that was the name of their book, and that term gets thrown around a lot too. And it's not particularly difficult. So I don't pretend that I'm sure a lot of people are pretty familiar with some of this, but I think it's worth examining and kind of restating again, because even though this was like a model that they constructed in the 80s, it's super, super pertinent, and in my opinion has only been proven more right with the passage of time and the further consolidation of particularly news media into these small few corporations that basically run the think pieces of the world, or certainly at least in this country. So the first way to look at this is, and I very specifically am using that term propaganda model, because when they came up with this idea, it was sort of to contrast between during the time at the Cold War, right? Like the thing that you always hear or you heard a lot then was that we in the West, and we particularly in America, have a free press, whereas the totalitarian communist states, right, they don't have a free press, right? If you go to the Soviet Union, you only get the party line newspaper or whatever. And in the United States, our alternative to that is this like wonderful open free press, or alternatively, as we love to say, the free marketplace of ideas, right? In which all ideas are welcome and only the best will rise to the top. And, they were obviously critiquing that and say, well, it doesn't really work that way. And in fact, there is a propaganda purpose to the production of news and the production of thought in the American media. It just doesn't adhere to the specific model of like a totalitarian state where like the government just says like, this is what's censored, this is what you can talk about, this is what you can't talk about. And so how does it operate? And so they came up with these 5 filters of mass media that they talked about. And again, they came up with this in the 80s and still proves true today in my my opinion. So the 5 filters, right? These are supposed to be these things that narrow and ultimately limit what is acceptable to say in media in general, but in particular here they were looking at news. So when you talk about like, you know, what kind of shows, what kind of programs, what kind of perspectives do these 24-hour network news shows put forward? And we talked a little bit during the intro about how, like, you know, there are these like partisan choices that are supposedly presented to you where it's like, well, Fox News is like the right-wing conservative one, or and MSNBC is the left-wing liberal one, and then CNN is this great neutral in-between where if you all you want is the straight hard facts, you go straight to CNN. And of course, this is all bullshit, which is what this model kind of says, because the kinds of things they put forward are still constrained by these 5 filters. So what are they? Well, the first one we've talked a bit about, and that's just the consolidation and centralization of media conglomerates, right? Which means that over time, you actually get less voices, less diverse opinions, right? Particularly when you're talking about things that get like national press or have national broadcasting or have the money and infrastructure to, you know, be available and be seen by millions of people, right? Over time, that becomes less and less and less to the point where, like I said, you know, you have like 4 or 5 kind of media companies. I mean, there's really, in terms of 24-hour network news, there's really 3. So all the diversity of like potential political thought, at the bare minimum, if it was just that, gets narrowed down to these 3 things, right? But even more so, and then this leads us into the second filter, is that ultimately, why are these media companies centralizing? It's because they're corporations, right? And what is the goal of a corporation? As we've said repeatedly on the show, it's to make money in the next quarter, right? It's not to report the news. It's not like they have this vested interest in just like being objective or being truthful or whatever. Their vested interest is in making money. So how do they do that? And that's the second filter, which is advertising. I think we've talked about this on the show in regards to like social media and stuff, but it works for television news just as well. If you're not paying for something, you're not the consumer, you're the product, right? Your eyeballs, like when you turn on and you're watching CNN, you are what they are selling to advertisers. They're saying, look at our programs, we get X amount of eyeballs, we got millions of people to watch this debate, right? That's why they all compete to like have the access to like do the primary debates and stuff, is because then they can sell that to advertisers. And then advertisers are going to have their own constraints, right? So for example, if your major advertiser is, I don't know, say like a plane company, and then that plane company has a big crash or something that week, maybe they're going to leverage you and say, hey, you know, we usually spend X amount of money on advertisement. Maybe could you not cover this in your headline news, or maybe not cover it at all? I mean, that's a very straightforward way to examine it, but this happens in much more subtler ways all across the board. The third filter, and Ken, you might be privy to some of this already, just given your own experiences. But the third filter is, how do you source news? And so as we've talked about, right, like, you know, especially in a 24-hour network news where you're competing with a bunch of other things, right, it's all about like getting a big story, or getting an important story, a story that you think a lot of people are going to want to know about, you know? And those stories inherently are going to be tied to institutions of power. So, like, if we want our program to be able to report on what's going on in the White House, or what's going on in the Pentagon, or what's going on by this big corporation. So, the sourcing of news creates kind of 2 subset filters here. First of all is access. So, in order to maintain access, in order to have the ability to get the scoop at a institution of power, you have to be kind of friendly with those people. You have to be nice to them. Otherwise, you're not going to get the scoop. Somebody else who did go to the luncheon, or did hang out and go to the bar afterwards, or stuck around at the cocktail party and exchanged pleasantries, or went on the golfing trip, or whatever the fuck it is people do.
Said happy birthday to quote Sanders.
Right, exactly. Like if you call, you say happy birthday or whatever, right? Like you're going to... Like, that's the way in which you get access to those things, right? And the second thing, you create a story that's critical. Let's say, in the case of, you know, again, the White House press corps, or like even like the Pentagon, right? The Pentagon is coming out with press releases all the time about the wonderful new wars and ways that they've figured out how to kill people in the third world, right? You want your, television channel or whatever to have the major scoop on that. If you run a story that says, maybe it's bad that the Pentagon's killing people, the Pentagon's not going to call you the next time they have a press release, right? They're going to call, you know, your competitor at the other channel. And so because of that, this bias towards the institutions of power emerges. And that ties into the other subset of that, which is experts. And we talked a lot about this already, like this rotation of experts that they bring in, and from the punditry class. We even brought this up on our episode on Lockheed, right? Where we talked about like hey, if you were a 4-star general and you retire, a bunch of these think tanks or even, a company like Lockheed Martin might say, hey, we'll give you like a 6-figure income if you go on the news every now and then as an expert because you have the credentials to do so, right? Yep. So the experts are sourced from the institutions of power as well. And you see this with the revolving door of Washington. And then the other side of this is like the fail son thing, right? Where it's just like, hey, I have a kid. I'm a millionaire and I've got a kid and he's like not really good at business. I don't know. I guess he could go on the news, or he could write an op-ed or something.
Oh, I think there's one of those people are on The View, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I think one of them may have had a war criminal father or something.
Yeah.
So that's how you get then, the people who are supposed to be the experts, who are also the ones giving the sources, right? The ones who are leaking stories, the ones who are putting forward stories, who are manufacturing these stories. They are all tied to these institutions of power, which again, in a capitalist state, are going to be institutions of capital. The fourth one, which is kind of related, the fourth filter, is this idea of flack, which is that anytime a story that is critical of these institutions of power comes about, you just can discredit them, right? Like you throw shit at the wall. You say, let's dig up all the dirt we can on so-and-so, on this journalist, on their sourcing, whatever. Or alternatively, you create think tanks. You create a whole host of think tanks to discredit particular people or to discredit ideas. We've seen this a lot with like climate change, ridiculous think tanks with names like the Institute for American Energy Progress will like come up and, they'll release a thing. It's like, actually, if you stop drilling for oil, everyone will die or whatever. Again, it's a sort of a very quick reading of it, but I think it communicates the idea. The fifth filter, and this one is the only one that's really substantially changed, although it's kind of coming back now, is anti-communism. And so they were writing this theory in the course of the 1980s, and so, in the height of the Cold War, and so what they were noticing is that one galvanizing force, one consistent thing that you could always do to get viewers is, again, the fear-mongering stuff, right? And so the Soviet Union being the big bad guys, anything that you don't like can be labeled as communist, which again, contributes to a bias, right? If we've already talked about this bias being cozy with the institutions of power and thereby, big corporations, like a story about unions, for example, or unionization or an attempt to unionize or a strike or anything like that is, first of all, going to be written off as like, well, this is not part of, what we consider acceptable programming because it's going to touch on all these like uncomfortable buttons. But also you can then just say, well, actually it's communists. Like these are just communists. And again, you can get experts to come on and verify that. Some guy with a name like, Heinrich Himmler III will come on and be like, actually, unions were Bolshevism or whatever. Now that's changed slightly, and the more broad way...
that all ended because communism's not what it was. So the media is doing its job.
Right, exactly.
And everything got better.
Oh, buddy, they better buckle up, man, because we're back, baby.
So, yeah, what happened after that?
Well, then, as Dwight, you mentioned earlier, like, I think Chomsky and Herman, kind of revised this, and especially in the wake of, like, 9/11, to say that the new kind of big, bad, spooky guy was, this threat of, like, terrorism, particularly Islamic terrorism. When this got into what we were talking about before, it was, like, ridiculous threat elevation. Some of our listeners who are, not maybe Zoomers, I've been digging on the Zoomers. I don't mean to. You guys are great. But, like...
I'm digging the Zoomers, man. Big shout out to the Zoomers.
But if you remember, like, the media landscape, especially post 9/11, right, where you had like the fucking Department of Homeland Security and their color-coded threat alerts. You guys remember those? Like, it's a yellow alert, it's a red alert, or whatever.
Like, terror level orange, guys.
Yeah. Oh shit.
Oh shit.
I better.
John Ashcroft just said it was terror level orange.
I better say no to that second plate of pasta. It's a threat orange today. But like, the idea there is that you consistently can draw upon an idea of a common enemy and use that common enemy to drum up ultimately consent, which is, goes back to this idea is that this is how the media ecosystem in a capitalist state can still be propagandistic and produce these certain messages. Of course, the Red Scare stuff is very much back with Bernie, and there's always going to be like the right-wing nutjobs like Sebastian Gorka saying that AOC is trying to come and take your burger out of your hand or whatever, and that's what Stalin did. Like, that's going to be present. But it also, I think you can expand that to now it's terrorism, it's also immigrants, right? The whole discourse that Trump has taken up about, like, the anti-immigrant thing, even in his, in the beginning of his campaign, people were like, where is this coming from, this anti-immigrant sentiment? It's like, if you watch Fox News in the decade of the 2000s, like, you saw, like, it was just constantly, like, wave of immigrants, right? And that's the stuff that you can use to fill in the gaps, again, when it's like a slow news day.
If I'm not mistaken, Ken, firstly, as just to say that you are one of my favorite posters of all time, but I believe that you posted this not too long ago, which was like, isn't it curious that caravans only tend to come up during elections?
Yeah, funny how that works, huh? It's almost like they're timing. It's because they want, you know what it is? They're such like screen hogs. They want to be on TV, and that's why they're coming from all the way from Honduras to the southern border to get on, jump. It's like you've seen this before. Someone's like, you just have some like local affiliate or something, and then a bunch of people run up behind him and start waving their arms around. That's what the immigrants are.
They're wearing t-shirts to say, like, hi, Mom, I'm on TV.
Exactly, yeah. I'm with stupid.
Yeah. That they probably got a relief effort after we did a coup in their country or whatever.
Yeah, it's probably all of NFL swag for the team that did not win the Super Bowl. That's where it goes.
Yeah, so all of this is to say, like, those, the reason why that model is instructive, particularly when you look at CNN, which again positions itself as something that is ostensibly nonpartisan, right? As opposed to, I mean, obviously all the channels pretend they're nonpartisan, but there's more of like a wink when you watch Fox. Like, it's pretty clear what their fucking, perspective is. It's written into their mission statement. But, an institution like CNN, and I'm sure many of the people who work for CNN will, like, actually sit down and think, like, I'm being a totally objective journalist when I'm going about pursuing this. And I'm sure there are a lot of, like, really well-meaning people who, like, enter into that, who are excited about this, this career of, like, should carry a certain prestige, right? When you get into a place like that. But the reality is, because of just the sheer size of the corporation, those other filters, the actual things that you can, like, talk about, it's not like necessarily there's some government censor who's going to walk in and, like, stamp you and say no or arrest you, right? It's not necessarily at that level, at least yet in this country. But, like, the reality is there is only a certain number of things that are going to be acceptable to talk about, or certain perspectives, right? Or even if they show all the perspectives, the amount of time that they wait to those different perspectives is going to be influenced by all of those factors. So at the end of the day, it is going to produce a rather lockstep, pro-business, powerful institution message, and that's going to carry across at least certainly all of the three major networks. So if like, again, in the case of my family member, like, somebody who will say, like, well, I get all the perspectives. I watch Fox, MSNBC, and CNN, right? Like, like you get the idea that, like, I'm seeing the wide variety. I'm seeing liberal and conservative, right? But what you're not seeing is, like, pro-worker. You're not going to see pro-union stuff. You're not going to see, things that highlight, like, progressive causes. Or if you do see stuff about, like, protests, for example, right? They're going to be carried and talked about in a very particular way if they're covered at all.
Yeah, I would believe it if they were watching Fox News and CNN and reading the Daily Worker.
and if you were listening to Eat the Rich Pod, which I might add is the only source for trusted news. Democracy dies in podness.
Yeah, they need to tell both sides. Ken's Twitter account and Eat the Rich.
I've often said that I know it becomes kind of a meme, the whole idea of both sidesing, but I do think it is really important to hear from both sides of the argument, from both Marx and Engels. I think that would provide you the widest amount of perspective
and just
on how to understand.
Like, moderated by Lenin.
Yeah.
Because you need someone to go between them. You need a referee.
Right, exactly. Right, yeah. A fair referee to step in.
It frustrates me that in thinking about kind of the stuff that we covered today, how much that there is still left to, like, discuss about, like, the media, and I hope that we end up, like, maybe focusing on another media outlet to talk about this. But I don't know, one of the questions that I had in kind of preparation for this episode, I was trying to think about is, like, we know that there are problems with a for-profit media model. What aspirationally would we want for a media outlet to look like? What should media be?
You guys are doing it.
Oh shit, we're in trouble.
The Young Turks paid me actually pretty livable salary, and they actually, do well. That's the thing, is like, this is what I was trying to say before. Like, it's easy to get dispirited, but just go on any one of these big names Twitter and see how many people are actually interacting. It's almost zero. It seems overwhelming and indomitable, but if you sort of look at it, you realize that it's sort of like the Wizard of Oz kind of thing, where he's behind a curtain and it's this sort of emaciated figure. Because then you look at the demand for something else, and it's really huge. And obviously there are challenges being on the outside, because we don't have the same economies of scale or capital that something like CNN does. But I really believe that what you do have is like the sort of popular demand, and you see it. There's a thirst to hear something different, because everyone knows that these kind of corporate outlets are just completely devoid. It's not even like they disagree with it. It's just empty. There's nothing. I really get that impression.
America's wallpaper.
Right.
It is. Are there any more points or things we want to address? I'm good.
No, it feels good.
Put me on public broadcasting. Give me a 2-hour time slot, just a shitload of caffeine.
Shame PR.
and just no filters. Probably an editor. Now that I'm thinking about it.
I would pay $5 a month to a Patreon to listen to more of you personally, Shane.
I think the only person who probably wouldn't pay that is Carrie.
Well, she gets it for free. Why pay for the cow when you can get the milk for free?
But have you ever been sitting down with somebody and they're like, hey, I want to show you the show or something, and you're like, okay, and you get in and you watch an episode or two of the TV show, and you're like, yeah, that was pretty cool, I'll check it out, and they're like, oh, you want to keep watching it, and you're like, I've had enough.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the state she's in 90% of the time.
I got the gist of it. I got the gist.
Yeah. There's only so many times you can say social democracy in a day.
Ken, I'm totally elated that you would be interested in coming on the show. I'm so happy that you came on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's a real pleasure.
Oh, of course. Let me know if you guys are ever in Washington. I'll get you a drink. It'd be fun to hang out.
Oh, buddy, that's coming.
Can you get me a press pass?
I can get you mine, and you have dark hair like I do, and I feel like they probably don't look at it very closely. Maybe that'll work.
Yo.
Okay, all right.
For real though, I'm dead serious about this. At some point, if Eat the Rich progresses in some way, I am dead set on getting press passes to events.
That'd be so much fun.
Well, I mean, one of the things I want to do is there's so many financial summits that happen.
Yeah.
I think fucking Davos is going on right now and whatever.
My favorite one is arms manufacturers. These are things left people, because we're also disgusted by it. A lot of people don't want to go, but if we infiltrate it and bring back what's going on there, people can be really shocked by what. And this is happening right in the open. It's not classified, just because no one bothers to look at it.
Oh man, it is honestly a dream of mine to go to some fucking interest rate conference in Lower Manhattan.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I could
pass,
I could blend in. I could pass, and I could be oh, so actually the yield curve is actually going to be a very good percent. I feel like I could make that work, and it is a absolute. Anyway, sorry.
The Laffer curve is making a comeback. It's just be the Chris Cillizza of economics.
But that's the thing. You don't even need to try that hard.
No, not at all.
You don't even need to try that hard.
You just say the pieties.
I'd just be the guy from the Stonks meme. I just hang out and go Stonks.
Bye.
That's a joke. Tell us about what you got going on, Ken. What's going on? Some big moves happening in your life here.
Oh gosh, well I moved to DC. Better and safer access to sources. A lot of people are nervous about talking on the phone, and I don't blame them. If anyone is in federal government, hit me up. I'm on Signal 202-510. 1268.
Any good FOIA requests coming down the pipeline right now?
Oh, dude, we're talking to an FBI top 10 list right here right now. Most vexum.
This one is a little less. I don't know. I don't have many lighthearted ones. I did a Jacob Wool one a few months ago. That's kind of funny. Now it's just the nuclear arsenal in Iran and a lot of anxiety-provoking stuff. So I don't know that I have any funny ones out. But I will. You can count on it.
We traffic in the dark arts here. You're welcome. demoralize and depress our listener base at any time, please feel free.
Thank you, Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor Ken Klippenstein, for coming on.
That's right. Stay cool, folks. Stay cool, folks.
Anger filled his eyes. He said,
CNN sucks!
they lie to me and they lie to you. CNN sucks! Fake news, it's just what they do. CNN sucks! Jim McCoster, you know it's true. CNN sucks! Come on, Jimmy, say it again.
CNN sucks!
CNN sucks!